The wind moved like a wounded creature across the plains, dragging dust and memory through the dying light. The sun bled its last over the horizon, painting the world in a sorrow too deep to name. Near a shallow grave marked with 2 rough stones stood a young native woman, Tashina, aged 20. Her wooden crutches sank into the soft earth as she stared at what was left of her family. The smoke from her parents' burning hut rose behind her, thin, bitter, and final. The wind tugged at her braid, as if trying to guide her somewhere, but she only whispered into the emptiness, "Where should I go now?" The earth didn't answer, only groaned beneath her weight as she began to walk. The sound of hooves came first, heavy and deliberate, breaking through the hum of crickets and wind. A shadow grew against the last light, mounted high, moving toward her. The rider dismounted near enough that his shadow swallowed hers. Amos Claiborne, age 30, was known from canyon to canyon as the giant cowboy of Sundown County, broad as an oak trunk, quiet as a prayer half forgotten. His coat was worn for miles of hard weather, his hat pulled low against the fading sun. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked, his voice carrying the hush of deep places. But when his eyes met hers, smeared with ash, trembling, exhausted, the question faltered. "I've lost everything," she said, her words fragile as thin glass. "My mother, my father, they're gone. I have no family, no shelter. Please, marry me." She said it not as a proposal but as a plea to live. The wind stopped moving. For a long time, only the horse's breath filled the silence. Amos's jaw tightened. He looked past her toward the graves, then back to her, as though measuring something eternal. Behind him, the distant murmurs of the town drifted, a reminder of what they'd say if he even spoke another word to her. Yet he did. "Come on then," he murmured, and without another thought, he lifted her as though she weighed less than a coat of dust. The crutches clattered softly as he placed her on his horse, climbed behind, and turned toward the town whose lanterns already flickered with suspicion. When they reached Dustwater, doors shut one after another. Faces peeked through curtains, eyes sharp with the cruelty of habit. A drunk near the saloon spat into the dirt. "Giant's lost his wits," someone whispered. "Talking in a crippled squaw." The word carried the sting of barbed wire. Tashina heard it, flinched, and lowered her head. Amos kept riding, his silence more dangerous than anger. The sheriff stood on the wooden boardwalk outside the jailhouse, arms crossed, the badge catching firelight. "Evenin', Amos," Sheriff Beaucrow said, slow and heavy. "You best turn that horse around. Ain't no room here for her kind." "She's got nowhere else," Amos replied. "Not your burden to carry," the sheriff said. "Then whose is it?" Amos asked. Crow's eyes hardened. "Yours, if you make it so." Amos nodded once and rode past. At the edge of town, he stopped by his barn, the old Claiborne place that leaned against the wind like an old drunk refusing to fall. He lifted Tashina down and helped her inside. The air smelled of hay and horse sweat, but it was warm. He laid a blanket on a pile of straw, lit a lantern, and said quietly, "You can rest here. Tomorrow I'll figure something better." She nodded, too tired to speak. Outside, the wind rose again, this time filled with voices. "Send her out," someone shouted. "We won't have her here." A rock crashed through the small barn window, scattering glass and light across the floor. Amos stood tall in the doorway, his shadow long against the night. "She stays," he said, not loud, but with the kind of calm that silences men. The mob hesitated, their courage thin as mist. The sheriff's voice came again, sharp as a whip. "You'll regret this, Amos." "I already regret too much," Amos said, and shut the door. Tashina was praying softly in her native tongue, the rhythm of her voice steadying the air. He sat near her, watching the flame tremble in the lantern. "You shouldn't have risked it," she whispered. "I ain't ever let a storm tell me who I can shelter," he replied. For the first time that night, she smiled. The smile was small, but it made something shift inside him, a piece of himself he hadn't felt since before war, before loss. The silence between them filled with understanding neither could name. By morning, the barn glowed gold with light. Amos made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and biscuits hard enough to last the trail. When Tashina woke, he was carving a horse from a piece of cedar. "You make beauty out of nothing," she said, her voice still wrapped in sleep. "Just shape what's already there," he replied, handing her the figure. She ran her fingers over the wood as if memorizing it. For a brief moment, Dustwater seemed far away. But trouble has a way of circling back. Sheriff Crow arrived before noon, his boots sinking deep into the mud. "You think you can keep her here? Marry her even?" he asked. "You'd be outlawed by your own kind." Amos didn't stand this time. He just looked up, eyes steady. "Then outlaw me." That evening, as the sky cracked with lightning, Amos built an altar beneath an ancient oak outside town. No preacher would come, save old Reverend Tate, who'd buried more men than he'd married. A child from the stables brought wild daisies for a bouquet. The world seemed to hold its breath. Tashina wore her mother's beaded shawl, one edge burned but still bright. Amos stood beside her, hat off, hair wet with rain. "Do you take her?" the Reverend asked. "I already have," Amos said. Tashina looked up, the rain sliding down her cheeks like tears that belonged to someone else. "Where you walk, I will follow," she whispered. "Where you stand, I'll build home," he replied. Before the Reverend could speak again, a sound cut through the rain, a gun being cocked. Sheriff Crow stepped forward, coat dripping, eyes cold. "That's enough. This ain't lawful." The crowd tensed, torn between hatred and awe. The rain thickened, drumming on hats, on hands, on the earth itself. Amos stepped forward, unarmed. "You'll have to shoot through me, Sheriff." The wind roared across the plains, carrying the weight of every choice that ever mattered. Crow's finger twitched, but the sight before him stilled it. Tashina, small yet unbroken, stepping forward on her crutches until she stood beside Amos. "Let him see," she said, voice clear as thunder. "We're not hiding anymore." Crow stared at her, at the steadiness in her eyes, the way she stood against everything that had tried to break her. His arm dropped slowly. The revolver hung useless at his side. The rain softened, turned to light. "Go on then," the sheriff muttered. "Finish what you started." They did. Under the oak tree, while the townsfolk watched in silence, Amos and Tashina spoke their vows again, not to prove anything, but to make the world listen. The Reverend's voice cracked with emotion as he said, "By the mercy of God and the will of the wind, you are husband and wife." No one cheered. The wind carried the sound away, leaving only the hush of something new being born. In the days that followed, Dustwater changed not all at once, but slowly, like a long winter giving in to spring. Some still muttered behind closed doors, but more began to nod when they passed Amos on the street. Tashina planted flowers outside the barn, wild ones that didn't care where they grew. Amos built her a small porch where she could sit at sunset, watching the sky burn and fade. Sometimes she laughed softly, and when she did, the horses would lift their heads as if to listen. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Amos carved a heart into the oak that had sheltered their vows. Inside, he etched their names, Tashina and Amos Claiborne. The wind still came and went across the plains, but it carried a gentler tune now, one that spoke of forgiveness and staying. Folks said love can't tame the West, but maybe it can teach it to listen. Years later, travelers passing through Dustwater would see the oak still standing, its branches swaying against the endless sky. Some would swear that on quiet evenings, if you closed your eyes, you could hear two voices in the wind, one deep and calm, one soft and bright, speaking of mercy, of belonging, of how even the loneliest heart can find its home. And if you're lucky enough to stand there yourself, feel the wind brush your face and the ground hum beneath your boot. That's them, still holding on. Remember that the world will always tell you whom not to love, where not to belong, who not to shelter. But if you dare to stand in the storm anyway, you might just find what the wind was always chasing, a place where love is stronger than shame and mercy rides beside you, forever.